So an API is an application programming interface. It allows applications to communicate with each other. And the YouTube data API allows people like you and me to interact with the data on YouTube. So in my last video, I showed you this app that I made where I wanted to find my most liked videos. So in this video, in the next 2 videos, I'm going to be showing you how I made this. In this video, I want to cover getting in all of my videos, grabbing all those from the YouTube database through the API, and then finding the likes from those videos because I want to find the most likes. So in my app, I want to see a list of all of the like counts for each of my videos. Before we jump into the API calls and actually doing stuff, I got to go over some boring things, but are necessary for you to follow along if you would like to do so. To integrate or communicate with the YouTube data API, you're going to need a API key, and I'll have this link down in the description, and you can just follow the steps here, watch this video, and it will show you how to create your YouTube API key through the YouTube API console. And then one more thing to keep in mind is the YouTube API, they use that API key to kind of keep track of how much you're using the API, and they call this your quota. Projects that enable the YouTube data API have a default quota allocation of 10,000 units. So different API calls have different units associated with them. In our case, in this video today, the example would be searching for things. So searching for my videos cost more than just getting data directly for one video. So if that doesn't make any sense to you, no worries, but it is something to keep in mind. If you do get an error saying you have exceeded your quota usage, you'll just have to wait 24 hours to try again. Alrighty, on to the fun stuff. So the first thing we need to do is get a list of all of my videos for my channel. So the way I did this was going to the YouTube search API. So over here in the documentation, you come to search and you come to list. And then this shows you all of the different parameters that you can search on. And it also gives you the URL that you will have to use in order to be using this API here. Basically, we're going to have a URL and then a few parameters that we're going to pass into that. And so now we need to figure out a way to test this and actually get this data. So during some of my recent projects, I started using this application called Postman that allows you to pretty easily test your APIs. You can see right here, I have the URL from the documentation we just looked at. And then right here is just a bunch of parameters, but that's not easy to work with. What is easy to work with is this right here. So it's like a little table that you can type in your parameters. So you can see here my parameter of type, I have a value of video, my channel ID, I have the channel ID, so on and so forth. Now, if you don't want to use Postman or you just want to use something on your browser, 2 websites that you'll need to use in order to do everything that we're going to be doing is API Tester. This is one that I've liked using. You just plug in your URL and the query parameters at the end of that, and then it will give you the response in a JSON format. And then I like to copy that and then paste it into this other website, JSON Formatter, which makes it a lot easier to kind of view the data. I'll have both of these websites linked in the description. All right, so before we actually get into the app, I want to test these APIs in my API testers because I don't want anything Thunkable related to be messing things up. I want to make sure it works. To start with, we'll plug this URL into Postman. And so it is already here. And then I have a few parameters, and this just kind of tells YouTube what I'm going to be searching for. So I'm searching for videos. The type of search I want returned is a video. I want to search my channel. So I plug in my channel ID, and down here, this last option, a key, I have my API key from the Google API Developer Console. And then this other one is going to be the kind of curious thing that we'll see throughout the video today. It's that YouTube limits its response to 50 items. So it's only going to return 50 items. And here I've already ran this. You can see I have a total of 73 videos and the results per page is 50. As we're doing these API calls, we have to handle the fact that it's going to only return 50 items at a time, and then we're going to have to iterate through the API to get all of the results. So let's go ahead and run this again just to make sure it still works. So I'm going to press send. And so that sends my API request to YouTube and returns back this JSON object here. And up at the top, we just have some metadata. And what we really want is in the items array right here. We're trying to get the video IDs for each of my videos. And so in Thunkable, we're going to be filtering down and grabbing these video IDs. But how do we get the rest of my videos if this is only 50 items? The way we do that is through this next page token. And so all we have to do is add another parameter here, page token, and copy and paste over this little token they gave us. And then we can send the request again. And now it's going to give us the rest of the items in the array. And you can see here now it's changed back to previous page token. So let's jump over to Thunkable and try to iterate through this API to get all of the video IDs inside of our app. So for the app, I've already laid out a few things. Basically, we're going to have 3 steps here. We'll do the first one, which is going to be using the API we just looked at to get the video IDs inside of Thunkable. The next step is going to be using those video IDs to get more information about the videos through another API call. And then finally, we're going to move over to actually parsing out the JSON response and looking at the top videos, and that'll kind of go over into the next videos. And then also on the blocks, I have kind of ordered these and gutted things out, and we'll go through and fill all these in so that you know everything that is happening, everything that's going on. So the first thing whenever we are working with APIs, a few things that I like to set up. One is have a variable with your API key so you're not pasting that everywhere. So I just have this in a static variable here, and here's a little text block with my API key. Then working with API responses and working with JSON responses, you'll likely need a little temporary object and a temporary list. These are just kind of placeholders that we use whenever parsing and looping through responses. And then finally, to actually show error messages and things like that, I like to have a little function that will show an alert. So if you come over to the component screen and drag in an alert, you can do that by doing this. I already have one, so I'm just gonna click on this. And we'll just leave since these are gonna be error messages, I'll put the title as whoops. And then I'm gonna clear out the cancel text, and the confirm, we'll just say okay. So now there should only be one button that says okay whenever we show an alert. And then to fill out this show message function here that we're gonna call, we're gonna go to the alert bucket, and we'll set the message to X, which is being passed into this function. You can see here, I have an input that I've dragged in of X. Then this sometimes requires a little time for it to actually set that message. So I added in a wait block, and then we'll come back to the alert and we'll just call show message. This function passes in a string or a text value that we're gonna show in an alert. So we set the message to that value, we wait, and then we show it. All right, so over here we have this button, refresh list of video IDs. And here in the blocks, it's called button get video IDs. And whenever this button is clicked, it's going to call this function here that's called refresh my video IDs. Now, this is just going to kick off the process of getting the video IDs. So we'll put all the API stuff here, but this is just going to clear out this stored variable that I'm using. So to clear out this stored variable, we'll set it to an empty list, and then we will set it again by calling this function down here, which is get video IDs with page token. Whenever we get to here, it's going to call this function, and when it completes, it's going to return the list of video IDs. Now, you may be wondering about this page token here. So if we look back at Postman, remember the first time I didn't have a page token. So basically that property was null. And then when we wanted to add it, we checked it off and it was there. So initially this value is going to be null, and I'll show you later how to recall this function with the page token if it exists. All right, so if you don't have an API already in your app, you can just drag over this web API. I already have it here. And then now the next step is to actually fill out some of the web API properties. So we need to set the URL to the URL from Google, copy that over, and then we need to define the query parameters like we did inside of our API tester. And so for this, we'll just create an object, and this is going to have 5 properties. And so I'll fill these out with what we were using before. All right, so in Postman, we have type, channel ID, max results, video, my channel ID, 50. And so those are already in place right here. The last 2 that we had were page token and our API key. So page token is getting passed into this function. So you can see here I added an input called page token. And so this little input can be found in the variables down here. So I'm passing in page token, and then the key was that static variable I showed you a few minutes ago. So we'll drag in Google API key. And then looking again at the API, we're doing a GET request. So I will go to my API and choose in Web API GET. And then we need to handle the response. So whenever we call an API, it's going to send us back a response. And it may send us a good response or an error response, meaning something went wrong. So there's 2 cases there. So what we want to do is check to see if what is returned is a good response. So I'm going to check the status, and the status is a number, usually a 200, 300, 400, 500, something in that range. And it's going to be a number, and then you can look up in the API's documentation what each of the numbers mean. But I know with most APIs, and the YouTube API included, a status of 200 means that it is a good, valid response. So I want to check to see if it equals 200. And I'm multiplying it by 1 here just to make sure that if it's a text value, Thunkable interprets it as a number. So we're checking to see that the status as a number is equal to 200. Now, if it is not, we want to show the error message. And this is where my little function that I created earlier comes in handy, because I can just call that function and then plug in what I want the message to be, and it will just work. So we are going to throw in the status and then the error, and then in between those, I'm going to use the new line block here to separate those. So if there's an error, it'll show the status error code that I can look up inside of the YouTube API documentation, and then it'll show the actual error. All right, so let's fill out this. If it is a good response, we need to do something with that response. So let's look at what that response looks like. So you can see here, I told you what we're looking for are all of my video IDs. So if we come to the JSON right here, we can see at the first level, we have this little items array. And then within that, we have a lot of objects. So what we want to do is first loop through this items array. So let me show you how to do that. So whenever we're looping, we need a loop block, and there are a few different flavors. The one we're going to use right now is this for each item j in list. And the list that we are getting is from our response. Our response is returned as a JSON, so we want to get object from JSON, and then we want to get that items property from the object that is returned. So I'll type in items here, and what that will do is now J represents each one of these objects that's inside of this items array. And so now we need to parse out and get the ID object from each of those objects, and then within that ID we'll get the video ID and store all of those inside of our my video IDs variable that we're clearing out and setting up here. So what that looks like is we're trying to add items to a list. So I will come to my list here and I'll say insert at last. And what list are we updating? Well, we're updating this one right here. So I can right click and do create get block. And I want to insert at last something inside of J. So remember, J represents each of those objects. And what did we want to get? We first need to get the ID property and then get the video ID property. And that'll give us the video ID. So we need to come to our objects and get property ID. And then one more time, we'll come to objects. We want to get the video ID. So let's go ahead and display what is returned from this now. And I want to display this in this little list viewer that says nothing yet currently. So that list viewer is called, in my app, list viewer of viewer IDs. So after all of this is said and done, I want to set the list viewer of video IDs to my stored video IDs that I updated here. I'm going to go ahead and return this value as well. All right, so now I'm ready to test this. So now if I click this refresh list of video IDs button, we should see all of my video IDs show up here. So perfect, that looks great. You can see all of this. But there's one more thing we needed to consider, and that's that thing that I told you we're going to be revisiting a lot. So we have to consider the response only having 50 items and there being more items in the array that we need to get. So what I'm going to do is check to see if this next page token exists in the response. And if it does, we're going to call it again and add all of those into our list of video IDs. All right, so next page token. Let's see if that exists. So we can copy this right here, duplicate this, and we want to see the next page token. And we want to check to see if that exists. After it's looped through everything, after it's all said and done, if this is not equal to null, then we want to do everything again. So then we'll duplicate this. And instead of the null page token, we're going to say a page token exists. And that's exactly what this is, this next page token. So advanced coding term right here and coding concept of what we're doing, you'll notice we're calling get video IDs with page token from within the function get video IDs with page token. This in the coding world is a concept called recursion, when you're calling a function from within itself. And so this is actually, we're looping through calling this function every time we need to if next page token exists. The YouTube API limits us to 50. If I have, 1,253 videos one day, this will allow us to loop through and check to see every time there's a next page token, it's just going to keep on looping and looping and looping and appending all of those new video IDs to this stored my video IDs variable. So now we should see when we call refresh list of video IDs, we should get all of the video IDs. So let's just verify this. XRLS is the first one. So we can see that here, XR, or I guess it's a capital I, not an L. And so now if I turn on page token, the page token ID, and I send that, and then scroll down to the bottom, we see the last one is PR4V. So if I scroll down to the bottom of my list viewer here, we see the very last one is PR4V. And so that confirms for me that we are now getting all of the video IDs that we need. And you remember earlier how I told you that there is a quota usage or a quota limit that we need to keep in the back of our minds? I don't want to keep pressing this button every time I want to test this, because I'm not going to be uploading another video while I'm shooting this one. So we want to, and I did this before, we're storing these video IDs in a stored variable. So these are going to persist every time the app refreshes. So instead of pressing this button and showing those there, I've defined a function up here that when this page starts, I want to check to see if there's already some values that exist in that stored variable. So here's my stored variable. I want to check to see if it's not equal to null. And if it does not equal null, then I want to do this thing here where I'm actually displaying it. And so boom, now it's always going to show those video IDs, and we have those for the good life of this app. And if I ever need to actually refresh the list, then I just have to refresh the list by pressing this button here. Alrighty, well, we are well on our way to finishing this app, and I know we've covered a lot of the groundwork and I've been popping all over the place. I hope you're following along. But the big picture of what we're doing with this app is we now have a list of video IDs, but now remember we're trying to find the videos with the most likes. And so I need to take these video IDs and get some more metadata about them. That being, maybe the title of the video, some links to the thumbnails. We'll use that in a few videos, and the actual like count. That's actually what we want. So the way to do that is we're going to be using a separate API. Before we were using the search API to search for our video IDs, but now that we have videos, we can use the video API, which has a separate URL here, and pass in the ID and then get back a few different things about it. So here, a required parameter for this API is the part. And there are two parts that we want. The first is the snippet. This contains things like the YouTube video title, the thumbnails, the description, all the kind of generic metadata about the video. And then we also want the statistics. And this contains like your like counts and dislike counts and things like that. So let's take a look at what this API call looks like. All right, so back in Postman here, I pasted in I have the new URL. You can see here the dash videos. We're not using dash search anymore. And we have 3 query params for this GET request. The first is the part, which we just looked at, and I showed you that we need the snippet and the statistics parts. The second is the ID. We'll look at that in a sec. And then the last is the API key, which is the same as what it was in our last API call. So let's look at the ID documentation. So right here, we can see that ID is a string. The ID parameter specifies a comma-separated list of the YouTube video IDs for the resources that are being retrieved. So this is a comma-separated list of the video IDs we want to get. So let's go ahead and copy over a few of the video IDs from our last API request. And then maybe we'll do one more for now, just for our test. And I'll do comma and paste that in there. And then I can send this request, and then boom, here is the response. So you can see we have some of our metadata here. So it's saying this is what kind of API call you did, a little tag for it, the total results, and then the results per page. And then here are our items. And like I said, this contains additional data, but it also contains here the snippet and our statistics. And inside of statistics is where we have our like count, which is what we want. So now that we know this works, let's not delay any further and let's jump into actually coding this out. So now when we press this button, we're gonna follow kind of the same format as we did before. I have a new variable that's going to be storing the full JSON response of all the videos with the statistics. And when we press this button, we want to call this function like we did before. So kind of boring. We'll just throw that in there. And then again, we want to reset this variable whenever this function is run. And we're going to reset this to an empty list. And once that is reset, then we're going to call this function here. And so this function takes in IDs, which is the IDs that we found in step 1. So this is stored in a variable. So I can just put that in there. And then now we can start filling out this function that actually does the API requests. So let's start filling that out. So we're going to rename the URL to include that videos extension instead of the search. And then we need to set our query parameters. So I'll go ahead and duplicate that down. And so for this one, we have basically the key is the same, but everything else changes. So maybe I'll just do this and keep this and trash this. So let me go ahead and put in those other parameters from Postman that we just looked at. All right, so part ID and key, and then in Thunkable, in our object, we have part ID and key, part snippet statistics, key is our API key, and then ID is going to be the IDs that we passed in here. And so now we do a simple get request here, and we'll go ahead and copy down some of this stuff that we did before so that we don't have to block all that out again. So we'll keep the message and the status check here. We're also going to keep this block right here where we're looping through the items, because remember in our response we have a items property with the array of videos, and then we'll keep this in list, but we're going to change what list we're updating. We're now updating the my videos with statistics, and then instead of driving down to the video ID, we're just going to save everything that's in each of those objects. And this right here, where we're going through the page tokens, we're going to do this one a little bit differently. Since we already know all of the video IDs that we're going to be needing and looping through, we don't have to check for that in the response. We can kind of preemptively loop through those from within Thunkable. So we're going to use a different type of loop for this one, and I'm going to try and walk you through it. It's going to be super easy. YouTube limits your requests to 50 videos, 50 items. So we need a way to kind of check to see if there's more than 50, and then to loop through each of those little iterations of 50. So the first thing we'll look at is we'll get this IDs variable that's passed in, and we want to look at the length of it. And to know how many times we need to loop through this, we want to loop through this for every 50. I'm going to do a little fanciness here where I'm going to divide the length of IDs by 50, and then we want to round that up. Not just rounding, we want to round it up. So that if there's less than 50, then this would equal like, say, 0.6. Then we round that up to 1. So then it will loop through this right here one time. But since we have, I think it was 73 videos, it's going to round that up to 2. So then we loop through this twice and we get 50, and then we get the next response, which will contain the rest of the response. But how does YouTube know what IDs to give us, what videos to give us? We need to update this IDs array to only send the IDs in batches of 50. So for this, I'm using a block I haven't used for anything else before, but I needed it for this one. So it's this in list get sublist from ID blank to ID blank. So in the list of IDs, if it's our first time through, we want to get the first 50. Second time through, we want to get the next 50. And so for this, we want to say get the first 50. So how are we going to do that? We want to start from, say, the first item to the 50th item. So if I, which is what is going to be the iterator here, if I is 1 and we want the last thing to be 50, then we need to multiply I times 50. So that will give us the 50th item. And then how are we going to get to 1? And then 51, and then 101. Well, for that, we can do I times 50, which if it's 1, that would equal 50. And then we can subtract 49, and that would give us 1. So this way, the first time through, we get 1 to 50. And then if it's your second time through, and I equals 2, then 2 times 50 is 100, minus 49 is 51. 2 2 times 50, which is 100. So then you get 51 to 100. And then if it's 3, then you get 101 to 150, and so on and so forth. So this is how we're going to loop through those paginated responses that we're getting for this API call. And the last thing we need to do to test this out is to display our JSON response here. And so that's in this label of video JSON, and I'll throw that in right there. And then we want to display everything that's in this stored variable here. So now, if this thing is all nice and refreshed, I can press this button and we should see list of objects. All right, so that's good, but I want to see, just make sure that there's stuff inside of there. So let me actually take this, or actually I want to do, get JSON from objects, since there were objects there. So now if I refresh the videos, so now we're seeing this JSON response, and I'm just gonna believe that it contains everything. I've tested it out before. So again, now that we have this JSON response displaying here, I don't want to have to use up those quota credits every time the screen refreshes. So I'm gonna duplicate kind of what I'm doing up here, and I'm gonna say if my video with statistics is not equal to null, then I want to display it. So let me display this to what we were using down there. And I need to grab that get JSON from object block. So I hope that was not too painful, and I hope I explained everything well. I know APIs can be very tricky, especially because every dang API is different. The specifics are different, but they all have similar things with the URL, the query parameters, and pagination is a little tricky, but you may not even need it. So we have done first getting the video IDs through the search API, then we got the video metadata through the video API. And so now again, as we're working towards viewing all of the most liked videos, let's maybe create a list of all of the like counts for each of the videos, just so I can prove to you that we're actually making more and more progress here. So down at the very bottom here, whenever this button is clicked, I navigate to this other screen here, and this is just going to hold a list viewer. So looking back at our JSON response here, remember I told you the snippet is what contains kind of the video high-level metadata. But to get our like count, we need to get down to the statistics object here and go to like count. So we're already inside of items, and we're just looking at each of these objects. So the first property we need to get is the statistics, and then the second property we need to get is the like count. So we're going to loop through everything in the variable and then drill down to like count and display it. So at the very beginning of this video, I told you that we would likely be using a vList variable here. And this is just a temporary variable that we're using while we're looping through and displaying things. So I want to loop through, so we'll say for each item J in list, loop through each of my stored videos with statistics. So this is all of the kind of JSON objects. And then we're going to add to that temporary list, create a get, we're going to add to that the like count. So to do that, it's very similar to what we've done before. We'll have each of our item J, and we're going to drill down, I think it was 2 levels. So the first one was statistics and the second one was like count. Then we'll say first statistics and then like count. And then once it's looped through all of those, then we will just display inside of our list viewer everything in this list. So now if I go to view my top videos, we now see all of the different like counts for all of my different videos. But now the question is, how do we turn those most liked, and how do we find those most liked videos, and then in turn display that video information in an app like this? Well, you will have to stick around for the next few videos, and I'll have the next one where you can click on it on the screen, where I'm going to be showing you how to sort through all this information and find our most liked videos. And the next one will be this one, where we're actually going to be displaying these videos where we can click on them, and that will take us straight to it. So stick around, and I'll see you in the next one.